Hello and welcome to Weapon History, where I tell you the history behind popular weapons in video games. Today... Oh god! So, let's say you're the United States government and World War II just got over, and you learned two things about it. One, it didn't really matter if your troops had the aim of a toddler, as so long as you can throw enough bullets downrange to make up for that. And two, most of your own troops were simply dropping the Thompson that they were given when they deployed and picking up the Germans' MP40s. And while yes, the Thompson was good, it really needed some improvements, especially on its weight. This thought would be on the United States' mind for well over a decade, as after the war, it wouldn't be until 1957 when Eugene Stoner brought up the AR-15, which used a much smaller round than the standard for the time. Doing so allowed weapons to automatically fire much more often than usual without incurring any penalties such as overheating, or simply because the amount of gases that were going around any potential jostling of the internal receiver to receive any damage. While a positive about the AR-15 was that it simply had little jamming issues and that much of the parts were stamp pressed rather than hand pressed, meaning that they could go ahead and more easily mass produce it. By the time of the next year of 1958, it was placed into a study ran by the Army's Combat Development's Experimentation Command, where it came out on top, unlike me at the SATs. By 1963, the US Special Forces got permission to use it, like asking your mom for a brand new Lego set at the store. So by the end of the year, the Department of Defense allowed to make the AR-15 standard issue. While it wasn't perfect, it did a decent job, but there was still things to improve on. It was also in 1962 when it got renamed off of the AR-15 platform into the M16. It was during this time that two separate platforms for the brand new M16 hit the town. Now, just like when I grew out my hair, some people did like what the M16 offered, but again, it wasn't perfect, and oh my gosh, why did I grow out my hair that long? Anyways, see, there was the M16, which was for the Navy, but there was also the XM16E1, which was given to the Army. Sure, these were some improvements, but for the Army version, it wasn't viewed as well, as mostly due to the fact that most soldiers weren't properly keeping them clean for the time. The XM16E1, however, did get a couple of issues, mostly with jamming. Since it was given out mostly to Army and Marines that were active in Vietnam, the humidity of the jungle often led to either the humidity itself causing rust on the internal mechanisms, or should any mud, foliage, insects, some other third option get into any of the important pieces of the gun, it could lead to jamming, or in some cases, It was for this reason that, especially with the amount of jamming that was going on, that with the reports that were happening, if you were going to open fire on an enemy soldier and your gun stopped shooting and theirs was completely fine, you don't need to be a fucking genius to figure out the results of that outcome. So, with this, it was back to the drawing board. Sure, there were some improvements, but the Army's version wasn't viewed so well, but after some tweaks, the XM16 became the M16A1. Oh yeah! Yeah, this was it. This had it all. New cleaning kits, new powder, and lube. This M16A1 was introduced in 1967, and it did solve a lot of those shortcomings of the XM16. As previously mentioned with the cleaning, the requirements on that got a bit more strict, allowing the weapon to be a lot more clean and properly usable. Additionally, some of the rifling and bores were improved, as well as some of the chrome plating that was added to the weapon. All of this combined allowed the M16A1 to help flip some of the negative connotations behind the XM16E1, which led to it being handed out like baby oil at a ditty party to the US troops in Vietnam. It's for this reason, mixed with reporters being able to capture pictures of so many US troops holding these weapons, that have caused the weapon to be synonymous with Vietnam to this very day. So you bet your non-water drinking ass that if you played a game about Vietnam and the M16 is in it, and you proceeded to ask somebody, hey, you think this game has the M16? It's like asking somebody at Olive Garden if they serve breadsticks. Since the weapon itself has a very noticeable silhouette with its carrying handle that doubles as its rear sight, it helps give a very identifiable side profile. Now, the M16 is still used and updated today, with having more recent variants, most recently being the M16A4. Now, if you're familiar with the M16A4 and the Colt M4, there is a little bit of a difference between them, and yes, they are made by the same people. Think of, like McDonald's making a Big Mac or a fillet of fish. Same general shitty meat, but made by the same people. The difference between the two is that the M4A1 is fired in burst, whereas the Colt M4 is just fully automatic. Additionally, some other variants of note are the XM117, which is basically just a smaller version given to special forces for close quarters combat, or if you needed a weapon when ejecting out of an airplane. Of course, the M4 platform or M16, however you want to argue semantics, put it in the comments if you really give a shit. But either way, this weapon was incredibly customizable for you to be able to fit it into really any job you wanted to. Most notably with Modern Warfare 2, as much of a shit show as that game was, it had a relatively good job of being able to show off the sheer amount of variety that you could handle with that weapon. You had a standard full auto assault rifle, which of course you get a burst variant of. You had a standard single shot version. You had the option to allow the receiver to take 9mm ammo, creating a almost submachine gun version of it. And additionally, there was even a light machine gun variant of it. It's also split off into a ton of other variants that I could list, but I don't have the Adderall or gummy bears to do so. So eat shit. As is custom here at Weapon History, we like to contradict ourselves almost as much as we love going over what games these weapons have appeared in. However, in an attempt to try and list all of them, I am going to go ahead and rapid fire off a bunch of them. Call of Duty, Battlefield, Arma, Left 4 Dead, Splinter Cell, Viet Cong, Shell Shock, Payday, Homefront, Soldiers of Fortune, Medal of Honor, Operation Flashpoint, Delta Force, Postal 2, Dead Island, Insurgency Sandstorm, Rainbow Six, X-Defiant, Army Ranger, Counter-Strike, 007, DayZ, Metal Gear, Far Cry, Grand Theft Auto, 50 Cent Bulletproof, Men of Valor, Spec Ops, PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, Army of Men, Tomb Raider, and most importantly, Fortnite. Okay, alright. Well, that aside, it has also appeared in a ton of movies, and no, I am not doing that again! That being said, on the gaming front, the weapon itself, being incredibly common as it is, often lends most gamers, including myself, being able to default to it in an environment where you may not be familiar with every other weapon. Additionally, while the impact of this weapon has had its notoriety most commonly on the more modern and Vietnam-era games, there are some futuristic and other spin-off games that take heavy inspiration from it, creating a profile similar to it, allowing people to kind of have that immediate initial comparison between the two. But aside, the weapon has remained a staple along the idea of the Vietnam War. For most people familiar with this weapon, it is most commonly associated with the Vietnam War. As of today, in 2025, the M16 has mostly been phased out due to the fact that it has simply been improved upon. Most commonly, the M4A1 or just simply M4 and its other variants are typically given out as standard issue to today's US Army and Marines most commonly. While it has served in conflicts such as Vietnam, the Persian Gulf War, and the war in Afghanistan, those are mostly newer variants. The variant that most people familiar with video games are likely familiar with, especially if you grew up playing a lot of the older Call of Duties, especially Black Ops 1, you might be familiar with the standard 3-round bursts that an M16 might have, and that is tied back to the M16A2, which notably had that, as well as a lot more options, especially with underbarrel attachments. Now, while the M16 and its other variants haven't been around as long as the AK-47, cough cough, first weapon history if you haven't seen that, it did help set a high standard for any NATO weapons, as since the 5.56 that it was commonly used required it to also be mass produced with the amount of weapons that were coming out. A lot of other, mostly European countries that were allies with the US also decided to switch many of their rifles over to this ammo. So, if it wasn't for the creation of the M16, and not only its creation but its long-term success, then for your more modern European firearms, probably wouldn't exist today. Say what you will about American engineering versus German, French, or whatever the hell if you're somebody across the pond. So, based on these factors and the media presence that it got in the 1960s and even up until this day in the 2020s, it has come out and cemented itself as a staple of this time period. And for that, I cannot deny its notoriety. If you made it this far and you want to know about any more weapons you'd like for me to see covered next time, be sure to follow to stay up to date on any new video drops. And y'all are amazing.